Thanks for joining us here on the Comic Culture Warrior YouTube channel. We've had, we've talked a little bit more about books than I thought we would, but we can't let today's conversations about books go by without bringing up one of our favorite books, Invincible, number 63 by Robert Kirkman and Ryan Ottley. It's another part of the Invincible War aftermath, the Conquest story arc, where the planets, the conquerors from the planet that Invincible's father came from, are finally putting their end game into play. They are now going in and taking Earth by force, and doing it at a time when Invincible is at his lowest. And at the end of last issue, if you didn't think he could go any lower, Robert Kirkman dug a hole and shoved Invincible into it. Because we were talking last time about how the fight, the way the fight was choreographed, you know, there was a lot going on. It was really a really brutal scene. And the other thing, too, was that as brutal as it was, the dialogue was very sparse.
Right.
Now, Kirkman takes the brutality and he dials it up even more.
Right.
And not only is Invincible getting the crap beat out of him physically, but Conquest is now just using emotion. He's like hitting him emotionally and saying just the most vile, terrible things that he can. And Invincible, I'm telling you, just is sitting there and taking it again and again, because there's really not much more he can do. And I was reading this book, and again, you know, for someone who reads a lot of comic books, when you read a lot of comic books and you see a lot of comic book fights, you tend to get... You kind of tend to get desensitized to the violence of them, and they're really, you know, kind of, oh, wow, yeah, blah, blah, oh, wow, that looked, but, you know. In this, I mean, Ottley has really, again, if you didn't think Invincible could get beat any worse than he has been after last issue, he gets, okay, you look at the cover, and that gives you an idea of how bad it's going to get.
Right. And... so, after I'm sure some of you guys might be sick of us talking about Invincible, and, you know, we did a review of 60, then we did 61, 62 together, that was like 2 months apart, and I wasn't really planning on talking about Invincible, again, anytime soon, until maybe after, but this issue, something huge happens in this issue, and this is why I read comic books, and I'm sorry if we're going to bore some of you guys again by talking about how awesome Invincible is, but it needs to be talked about. This is a book that begs to be talked about. So if the last two issues was all about Mark, Invincible, getting the shit kicked out of him physically, this is where Conquest mentally breaks him.
I mean, almost literally breaks him.
And this comic fucking broke me.
Yeah.
Like,
no, this was
seriously.
I thought the last issue was hard to read. This one's even tougher. And this is, you know, we talk so much about what Kirkman does with his characters in The Walking Dead, or we used to talk about it in The Walking Dead. And I call this Kirkman pulling a Walking Dead in this book. Because he is brutalizing these characters, and he's been killing characters that you've gotten really attached to. Mm-hmm. And it seems almost merciless. And even, again, after the end of the last issue, Kirkman addressed what happened in the book in the letter column. What happens in this issue, for those who've been reading Invincible for a while, is huge. So huge that, yet again, Kirkman, right from the get-go, in the letters column, addresses what happened and saying, look, I know you're going to be angry about this. I know it hurt. It hurt me just as much to kill this character as I'm sure it hurt all of you. But bear with me. There is a reason why it happened. And if you read the next issue, you'll see why. So, this is where kind of you have to give a writer and a creator a little bit of trust. That, you know, He's taking you on in a direction. He's trying to tell you a story, and sometimes you're not going to like what he's saying, and you might not. You know, the ride is been a really torturous ride. You know, I don't know if I'm going to feel. I don't know if I'm going to feel so much elated when this resolves itself as relieved, because. There's stuff going on in this book right now that I don't know how Kirkman's going to work himself out of it, or even if he's even going to try to work himself out of it. He's just going to say, you know what, this is the way life is sometimes, you know.
And I'll tell you, man, never have I been more hesitant about reading a comic in a very long time. Which is like, I'm reading it and I go, I don't want to turn the page because I don't want to see it, and then it gets worse. And then something happens in this book halfway through, and you're like, fuck. And you're just like, they're fucked.
Yep.
And like, and you as the reader are fucked. I mean, and you don't want to turn that page. Like, he broke me, man, like mentally, and just the anguish, just seeing this, and this can only come from a comic book, or even from any type of artistic work that just can cause this much emotion. Mm-hmm. It's fucking remarkable.
It is very remarkable. And then it also speaks to some of the advantages that you have within, say, doing a book like this within the Image line, where these are your characters and you do what you will with your characters. Kirkman cannot do this in the Marvel Universe. He cannot do to Invincible, he cannot do to Tony Stark and Pepper Potts what he did to Invincible and Adam Eve. Mm-hmm. You can't. There are themes that you would like to explore with these other characters, but because they're licenses, because there's so many people who have control over how these characters are perceived and what they do, you can't do it with them. So that's when you have a character, where you have a creator like, Kirkman, who does this sort of thing with Invincible, and you sit there and you go, he's just an archetype, he's just an amalgam of all these other existing characters. Well, in a way, yes, that's true. But this is where you are able to take those characters and say, wow, wouldn't it have been cool if you were able to see what happens to Mark happen to Superboy? Mm-hmm. Or all these, but that's never going to happen. And the other thing, too, is, even if a creator decided to tell this kind of story with, let's say, within the main Marvel or DC universe, you're going to have another writer come along and undo all that. You're going to have someone retcon all that. Whereas with this is Kirkman's property. This is his universe. These are his characters. Unless he says, go on ahead and do it, you're never going to have another writer come in and just basically undo everything he's ever done, and thus negating the impact of these things.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, is because it's his book, and pretty much what happens, that's just how it's going to be.
It's going to be, right. So, I gotta say, I'm reading this. I really do hate this Conquest, dude. I really do. And I don't know. Invincible makes a pronouncement at the end of this book. I do not know how that's going to happen. And as someone who's read a lot of comic books and who also writes comic books, this is a great feeling to have. I have no idea where Kirkman is going with this next. Mm-hmm. I don't know I don't know what hand he's distracting me with to do that magic trick with. Mm-hmm. I don't know how he's going to pull the rabbit out of the hat. I have no idea.
And there's just this great line at the end, the last panel, where Invincible goes to Conquest. It's like, I don't care how strong you are, I don't care how fast you are, I can see the future. You don't live to see tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And you're like, fuck, all right. That's just a great line. I mean, he's broke. That's it. He can't take anymore, and he just had it. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I don't know how he's gonna get it, because he had his arm broken in the last issue, and then some very graphic. I mean, getting his leg broken, just like off the bone.
He's in bad shape.
Fucked.
He's in really bad shape. So again, I don't know where this is going. I have no idea. And that's kind of cool. It's kind of cool not being able to see it, especially when you read some stories and some writers just telegraph their punches. I have no idea where this is going. So can't say enough about it.
Yeah, so, I mean, we're going to keep talking about this book. If the book keeps, giving us this feeling and just, reading every issue, it just continues to be that good, is unfortunately for some of you guys, just how long we're going to be talking about this. This book just does not disappoint, and it hasn't disappointed for the last 4 issues in a row, at least.
Right.
Longer for me, but...
And yes, I do. Just so you know, I do realize that Robert Kirkman makes money off that book. I know I've said, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is Robert Kirkman is not making that book for the money. Yes, he's making money off of it, but that book is a labor of love. He just happens to be making.
And the book would, no matter how awesome Robert Kirkman writing is, the book just wouldn't be what it is without Ryan Ottley's art. Yeah. It's just as important.
And the sad thing, though, is that book really should... I mean, for all the acclaim it gets, it does not sell the numbers it should. What is that, about totally 10,000, 12,000 copies?
It's something like that.
Some 10, 12. That book should be selling...
I don't even think it's in the top... Yeah, I don't even think it's in the top, 100 or 200 or even 300.
Really, it should be... Which
I don't understand.
At least a top 50 book. At least a top 50. This book should be selling, at least 50, 60,000 copies.
It should be.
At least.
If the industry was, not broken.
No. Well, fanboys would open their minds a little more. And not have to go through everything Marvel publishes. Which we are actually going to be talking about in Last Rants. See you then.